The morning Lee left, the air smelled of wet earth and jasmine. Sam stood by the wooden gate, her hands resting gently on her stomach, a secret she hadn't yet told him. The world seemed still, except for the faint hum of the truck that carried him away. He turned back once, waved, and smiled the way he always did before every mission. That was the last time she saw him. Days turned into weeks. The letters she sent never returned. The phone calls went unanswered. His commander said only one thing: Lee has gone missing in an operation. We're still searching. Those words echoed in her chest like thunder. Missing. Not dead, but gone. Somewhere between heaven and earth. Sam's life fell into quiet repetition. Every morning, she fed the chickens, watered the plants, and looked at the road that led to the horizon, the same road he had taken. Each evening, she sat on the porch, the orange light of sunset spilling over the empty chair beside her. Sometimes she would whisper into the wind, "Lee, can you hear me? I'm still here." But now, she wasn't just living for herself anymore. Deep inside her, a tiny heartbeat was growing, a piece of Lee that refused to fade. The day she found out she was pregnant, she stood by the mirror, touched her belly, and cried softly. Not from fear, but from the ache of love that had nowhere to go. Outside, the rain began to fall, gentle at first, then harder, as if the sky itself was grieving with her. Yet in that storm, Sam felt something she hadn't felt in weeks: warmth. Because somewhere, she believed, Lee was still alive, and their child would one day hear the story of a love strong enough to survive, even silence. The days passed slowly, like the rhythm of a lonely clock in an empty house. Sam began to adapt to the silence, not because it hurt less, but because she had no other choice. Each morning, she would sit by the window with a cup of warm tea, listening to the rain tapping gently against the roof. She had moved from the bustling city to a small village near the mountains, Lee's favorite place, where the wind carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. It was peaceful, but peace had never felt so heavy. Sometimes, she would take long walks through the rice fields. The golden waves brushed against her hands, and in those quiet moments, she could almost hear his voice again, calm, deep, full of warmth. "When I come back, I'll build you a house here," he had once said, his hand tracing invisible lines in the air. "A small one, near the water. You'll plant flowers by the window, and I'll fix the roof every rainy season." But now, there was no when, only if. At night, she dreamed of him standing by the riverbank, smiling. Every time she tried to reach him, the scene faded like mist. She would wake up crying, her heart aching with the weight of things unsaid. Still, she kept moving. She started growing vegetables, sewing baby clothes from the soft fabric Lee had bought months before. Each thread she stitched felt like a conversation with him, wordless, tender, but real. Sometimes the villagers would ask, "Are you alone?" She would smile and answer gently, "No, he's with me." They didn't understand, but she did. Lee was everywhere. In the wind that rustled the trees, in the warm sunlight that touched her face, in the heartbeat she carried beneath her ribs. Even though the world had gone quiet, inside her, life was still speaking softly, but with incredible strength. Weeks turned into months, and the world outside continued its rhythm, planting, harvesting, raining, blooming, while Sam lived in a strange in-between space, neither waiting nor moving on. Her belly grew rounder, a small miracle that made her feel both strong and fragile at once. Every evening, she would check the old mailbox at the gate. It had become her quiet ritual, a moment of hope wrapped in habit. The rusty hinges creaked as she opened it, her breath catching each time she saw an empty box. No letter, no message, no word from Lee. The army had sent an official notice months ago. Mission classified, communication suspended until further update. Those words haunted her, cold, distant, painfully vague, but she refused to believe that suspended meant lost. One afternoon, as the sun spilled gold over the valley, Sam sat by the riverbank, clutching one of Lee's old shirts. She pressed it to her face, inhaling the faint scent of him, a mix of cedar, sweat, and dust. It was fading now, like a memory dissolving with time. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Lee, do you know?" she whispered, touching her stomach. "He moves every time I talk about you. Maybe he knows his father is a hero." That night, the baby kicked for the first time. Sam gasped, her hand trembling on her belly. It was as if life itself was reminding her that even in absence, love had left a trace, living, growing, waiting. Still, the silence was cruel. Sometimes she would imagine Lee walking through the front door, dirty and tired, his eyes soft with that familiar tenderness. She pictured how he would touch her face, laugh, and whisper, "I told you I'd come back." But when she opened her eyes, there was only the empty room, the flickering light of the oil lamp, and the sound of crickets filling the hollow night. The loneliness was sharp, but inside her, beneath the grief and the longing, something else had begun to take root. Strength, quiet, enduring, and real. Lee might never send a letter, but the child inside her, he was the message, the last unbroken link between love and hope. Winter crept in quietly, turning the nights colder and the air sharper. The small house that once echoed with laughter now carried only the rhythm of Sam's footsteps and the gentle beating of her heart against the silence. Each day was a test of endurance, of faith without proof, of love without voice. Sam had grown accustomed to living in fragments, a piece of Lee in every sound, every dream. She often sat by the window, sewing tiny clothes for the baby, whispering Lee's name into the fabric as though the thread itself could carry her love across the distance. Then, one morning, when the fog was still heavy over the hills, a jeep stopped in front of her house. A man in uniform stepped out, not Lee. Her heart froze. The officer's eyes were kind but heavy, and his silence said more than his words ever could. He handed her a folded envelope with Lee's name written across it. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a short letter, written in Lee's handwriting, faded, shaky, but alive. "My dearest Sam, if you are reading this, it means the mission is over. I don't know if I made it back, but please live. Live for both of us. For the little one. Don't let the world take your light. I carry your love like a compass, and it always points me home." Sam pressed the letter to her chest, her tears falling silently. There were no screams, no collapse, only a deep, aching stillness, the kind that reshapes the soul. That evening, she stood outside, watching the sky melt into shades of crimson and gold. Her hand rested on her belly as the baby kicked softly. "You see that?" she whispered. "That's your father saying goodnight." And in that moment, too, Sam realized love did not always end in reunion. Sometimes, it lived on through the lives it had touched, through the breaths it had inspired. Lee might never walk through that door again, but he would never be gone. Because a part of him was already home, resting beneath her heartbeat, waiting to be born. The story of Sam and Lee is not merely one of love and loss, it is a quiet reflection on endurance, faith, and the invisible thread that binds to hearts across time and distance. Sam's life, after losing contact with Lee, teaches us that love is not proven by presence alone, but by the strength to carry it when everything else disappears. She could have surrendered to despair, but instead, she chose to live not out of denial, but out of a deeper understanding that love, once real, never truly leaves. Lee's final letter was not just a goodbye. It was a reminder that even when life pulls people apart, the meaning of their love continues to shape what remains. Sam's courage, her quiet strength, and her decision to bring new life into the world were not acts of survival, they were acts of devotion. Through her pain, she found a purpose greater than sorrow, to live so that love could continue breathing through her child. The story tells us that sometimes, love does not return in the way we wish. It may not come home in a uniform or walk through the door we keep waiting by. Yet, it can still find its way back through memory, through spirit, through the life that grows from it. True love is not measured by time or distance. It is measured by what remains after everything else has been taken away. And in Sam's heart, that love, fragile, silent, and eternal, continued to bloom, teaching us that even in loss, there is a kind of peace that only love can leave behind. To Sam's journey reminds us that the truest strength often grows in silence, in the spaces between heartbreak and hope. She lived through nights that seemed endless, through days when the world felt colorless, and yet she kept going. Her courage was not loud or heroic in the way stories often tell it. It was quiet, patient, and deeply human. The baby she carried became both her anchor and her light. Through every heartbeat she felt beneath her skin, she learned that love does not vanish with absence, it transforms. It becomes something we nurture, something that gives us reason to rise each morning, even when grief sits beside us. Lee's sacrifice and to Sam's endurance are two sides of the same truth, that love is not about possession, but about faith. Faith that what we shared, what we gave, and what we felt will continue to exist, even beyond sight or sound. In life, there are moments when we lose contact with those we love, not just in war, but in distance, misunderstanding, or time. Yet, like to Sam, we can still choose to hold on with dignity and grace. We can choose to live fully, so that the love we once received continues to create life around us. Perhaps that is the most profound message of all, that love's truest form is not in reunion, but in remembrance. Not in promises fulfilled, but in hearts that keep beating with devotion long after the world has gone silent. To Sam's tears, her resilience, and her will to live are not signs of weakness, they are proof that even in tragedy, love can grow, heal, and carry us forward, because when love is real, it doesn't end with goodbye. It becomes the quiet force that helps us keep living, one breath, one heartbeat, one memory at a time.